Good evening. I do feel like I should unmute myself just because it's been a long time since I've been in a room with live people, so welcome. It's exciting to see all of you here, and for those of you who are joining us virtually, welcome. And we hope that the technology works for you and you're able to fully engage in the subject. I do want to introduce myself first. I'm Kirk Aubrey. I am Vice Chair of United Way Salt Lake and Co-Chair, along with Rich Nye, Superintendent of the Granite School District of Promise Partnership. And so this is an exciting evening for us to continue on our journey. Bill Krim earlier with a group of you thanked our sponsors, and I want to do it again for those of you who are joining us virtually. First, so grateful to the Salt Lake Community College for being this year's presenting sponsor. Let's give them a round of applause. AT&T for being a supporting sponsor, or major sponsor, sorry. Can't cut out AT&T. Otherwise the technology just stops right there. We don't have anything. Comcast for being a supporting sponsor. And Rocky Mountain Power, Deseret News, and KSL TV5 for being community sponsors. So let's give them all a big round of applause. This is actually our fourth year presenting a speaker series on racial equity. And as you know, for those of you who know what we do at United Way Salt Lake, this is really core to the work we do to address what we all see as persistent and unacceptable inequities. And we see those in education, we see them in health, we see them in economic outcomes that exist throughout our communities. This continues to be the work and the focus of our work to try to enable outcomes-focused and cross-sector partnerships. That's the basis of the work we do at United Way, is engaging with the community and partnering with the community to try to make progress. This event is just one opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to learn together and then to act together. So we don't want this to just be a situation where we're gathering information or sharing information, but we're putting information and knowledge and insight to work. And so we've got some really great content for us to be talking about and thinking about tonight. And we want to get your thoughts as we go through this process on ways that we can and you can personally create change. If you want to do that throughout the evening, you can tweet your ideas at UWSL using the hashtag #ThisIsEquity. Also, for the Q&A portion of the event, we would encourage you to use the Slido app. If somebody tells me I pronounced it wrong, that's okay. And add any questions you've got for our speaker, Mr. Vasquez. The instructions are supposedly on the screen. We will try to address some questions later, so you're going to get both the opportunity to hear from a really compelling speaker, as well as the opportunity to engage with that content and with our speaker. I'd like to now turn the time over to Dr. Clifton Sanders, Provost for Academic Affairs at Salt Lake Community College, to say a few words. Dr. Sanders.
Well, good evening and welcome to the 2021 Building Equitable Communities Speaker Series, where through these robust conversations, we will take a deeper look at race and diversity in America. My name is Dr. Clifton Sanders, Provost for Academic Affairs at Salt Lake Community College. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the long overdue and momentous changes we've seen in the last year regarding broader recognition, awareness, and action around racial equity and justice. Part of our commitment to building on and expanding that awareness is recognizing that the land we are on, where we live and where we work for equity, is the traditional territory of the Eastern Shoshone and Goshute peoples. We want to honor those who have stewarded this land and acknowledge a need to address continued inequities experienced by Indigenous peoples. We are excited to host this year's speakers, all of whom bring their expertise and perspective to illuminate truths and inspire us to start conversations about these complex issues in our community. Given the year we have just been through and the continuing dialogue and call to action regarding systemic racism and social injustices, these conversations are more necessary than ever. And as the community's college, Salt Lake Community College is proud to join United Way as a presenting sponsor. We need to be leaders alongside other organizations in interrogating our own practices and policies and strengthening the level of inclusion and trust we build for faculty and staff of color and other groups who have been historically marginalized. As the most racially and ethnically diverse higher education institution in the state, we know that diversity is an asset to the learning environment, but we also know that without equitable and safe environments, diverse students, staff, and faculty may not succeed to their full potential. We are incredibly fortunate to have Hugh Vasquez with us today. Hugh is one of the country's top equity and diversity educators and a consultant to campuses and organizations working to create healthy multicultural environments. In the past 20 plus years, Mr. Vasquez has worked with hundreds of organizations and schools that want to take on the challenges of eliminating the social conditions that produce racism, sexism, classism, homophobia, and the like. Tonight's conversation will be hosted by Bill Krim, President and CEO of United Way Salt Lake. And we are so glad you decided to join us, and we look forward to a deep, engaging, action-oriented dialogue. Thanks so much for being with us. And this time I'd like to turn the podium over to our guest and presenter tonight, Mr. Hugh Vasquez.
Good evening to you all. Oh, response is actually fine. We'll pretend we're in school, right? Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very, very happy to be here. I'm going to take this off now. I want to thank you for honoring the original First Nations of this land. First of all, thank you for that. And there may be some people in the audience or people who are listening who are from those First Nations and appreciate that we are recognizing the land that we are on. Always good to do that. I am excited to be here with you, not just because it's like real people in front of me right now, and that there's a real person sitting next to you right now. Isn't that cool that we get to do that right now? Even though we're not out of this pandemic situation, I'm glad that we're here to do this. I'm going to say a few words, and then Bill and I are going to be in conversation. My hope is that what I say and what we say actually sparks conversation in this room. This is less of a lecture and more of a conversation, and with hopes of engaging you. So if you feel so engaged, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay to comment, to raise your hand, to speak, to be part of the conversation, and I hope that you do. My opening is I have to tell you that I come from a Mexican family in California. I am second generation, and I come from some ancestry that is guiding me in the kind of revolutionary spirit that I have. My Mexican grandfather, fought with Pancho Villa when he was 14 years old. Now, I have said that to audiences many times, and when I first started thinking about that and telling people that, I thought I was what I am and was the most unique Mexican in the audience. And then I found out that every other Mexican in the audience had a grandfather that fought with Pancho Villa too. So I'm not actually that. Is that true, Ms. Chavez? Okay, yeah. Well, we're checking on that. So I say that because my work And why I'm here and what I want to talk to you about doesn't come just from me, it comes from my ancestors. It comes from the people that I come from. In fact, the article that I wrote that some of you have read, that one of the reasons that I am here, was sparked not by just me, it was sparked by people that I come from. So the importance of acknowledging ancestors is so that I can move forward again, so that I can take another step. You all have ancestors too. So I want you to think about the ancestors you want to bring into this room, the people that you come from. And this could be mothers, fathers, grandfathers, great-grandmothers, great-great-great, whatever it may be. Get their name, say their name, either to yourself or aloud. Who are you bringing into the room? Who do you want to be part of the work tonight? I'm bringing my grandfather in, my Mexican grandfather in, Enrique Vasquez. Who are you bringing in? Holler it out, say it, or think it. Just say a name, and I'll listen. So we'll bring them all in. We'll bring them all in. So let me tell you a couple things. What drove me to write this article, and then I'm going to get into a couple of major points that I want to share with you this evening. I have been working with education systems and with other systems for decades, and these are systems that all of us are familiar with. And my work with them, with these systems, were to work with leaders to change what was happening in education, to not accept the way that education has been designed, and to stop educating in the way that we've been educating, right? We know it doesn't work for most kids. We know it doesn't work for most families, and yet we're doing it anyway. And I've been working with leaders to try to interrupt and to disrupt the way that we do education and to change it into something else. And then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, I, along with so many others, were thrown into this chaotic moment. And I remember as I was grounded last March, as we were sheltered in place last March, I remember sitting in my home office and saying to myself, there's something afoot here now. The system has stopped. I stopped hearing the hum of the system. I stopped hearing the normal ways that we were doing things, right? And I began to wonder if we have an opportunity to do something different now. And I couldn't sleep. Literally, I couldn't sleep. And I would awaken at 4 in the morning, at 5 in the morning. And this is why I'm saying the ancestors were waking me up. They wouldn't even let me sleep. They were waking me up and they're saying, there's something you gotta say. There's something you gotta articulate. And what it became was the article that you have, that is the article about what if we didn't go back to school as usual? What if we didn't do that? And I started getting it that we have an opportunity to actually stop doing what we normally do. We have an opportunity to stop doing what we normally do. And I was driven to try to articulate what that was, why that was, and what we might do differently. So that was one of the drivers of the article. The other was, there were some of us that were looking at something called, we're in a portal now. If you can imagine a portal is a pathway, like a tunnel, that goes from one place to the next. This activist from India named Arundhati Roy wrote this poem about being in the portal. And in it, she talks about when you're in a portal, you are leaving something old and moving towards something new. And she said that if we are in a pandemic, we have the opportunity to break from the past. Imagine moving through a tunnel, moving through a portal, and you're leaving behind you the things that you need to leave behind you. And you're imagining something new. You see a light at the end of that portal, and you're moving towards it. It's a gateway. The portal is a gateway to something else. And this was driving my thinking at the time, as we're in something. We're in a portal. We're in a pathway. We're on a pathway. where we actually have an opportunity to go from the old and into the new. But what Audra Roy, what she says is that we can walk through it dragging the carcasses of our past, or we can walk through it with little luggage and be ready to imagine another world. And that's where I was wanting to go. I was wanting to let go of the past and imagine a different world. And that's what led to this article. And that's what led to making movements to try to do something that was different. I want to share with you 3 major points before we get into conversation tonight, before Bill and I get into conversation tonight. And these are 3 points that I've been thinking a lot about. The first one is a metaphor, is by using a metaphor. And here's where audience participation comes in at least a little bit here. I'm asking you to entertain a metaphor with me. And the metaphor goes like this. When it comes to racism, when it comes to the social conditions that we're in, that we are all on the same boat. Let that sink in a bit. We're all on the same boat. Now let me see your hand if you resonate with that. If you say, yeah, I'm with you, Hugh. We're all on the same boat. Let me see your hand if we're all in the same boat when it comes. So here's what's going on in the audience right now. Some of your arms just shot right out. We're all in the same boat. Some of you are like, maybe. Yeah, I'm not quite sure. And some of you are like, oh, no, we're not. Right? But I want to ask you to sit with this metaphor for a moment. Because the metaphor says that when it comes to social issues, when it comes to racism in particular, we are all in the same boat. Martin Luther King said it this way, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. We are caught in a network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. That means we're all on the same boat. So I want you to just hold that metaphor that if we are all in the same boat, what does it mean, right? And then we go a step further with the metaphor. And I want to say it this way. We are all in the same boat, but we're not all on the same deck. Now, how many of you say, I could live with that, right? Now the hands are going up, right? We're all in the same boat, but we're not on the same deck. Have any of you been on a cruise? I have not, so I'm looking at the people who have been on a cruise, right? But what I know about cruises is that the experience on the upper deck is different than the experiences on the lower deck. Is that fair to say? Right? There's something that happens on the upper deck. What happens on the upper deck? You have access to everything, right? You have food, you have play, you have music, you have fresh air, right? But on the lower decks, you have access to none of that, or limited access to it. The experiences on one deck is different from the experiences on the other deck. So although we're all on the same boat, we are on different decks. The decks are not equal. And the primary reason the decks are not equal is something we're going to talk more about tonight, which is that we don't see each other as human beings across the decks. The fate of those on one deck are not believed to be connected to the fate of those on another deck. Martin Luther King, some say, got it wrong, that we are tied in a single garment of destiny. But the metaphor says he got it right, that what happens to those on the bottom deck actually affects those who are on the upper deck, and vice versa. So we see on this boat and with the decks that inequality is perpetuated by the other being seen as inhuman or as less human. So stick with the metaphor for one more second, because here's another part to it. And guess what? We're all in the same boat, we're not on the same deck, and there's a hole in the bottom of the boat. Who ought to be concerned? Who says everyone? Who ought to be concerned? A bunch of hands goes up, right? Who says those at the bottom ought to be most concerned? Those who are closest to the hole. So a couple hands are raised. What about those on the top? Should they be concerned? Right. They got the lifeboats, right? They have the lifeboats, right? So in this metaphor, there are no lifeboats, by the way. We're all in the same boat. We're not on the same deck. There's a hole in the bottom of the boat. who ought to be concerned is everyone. Everyone ought to be concerned. The hole in the boat is inequality. So if you name the hole inequality, the boat's going to go down if we don't do something about that. We have research that shows in societies where there is a high level of inequality, everybody is hurt by it. And guess which country is on the top of that list in the world? The United States. We are the country on the top of the list of the most inequality of all the countries in our world. Now, how do they measure that? It's access. It's access to health. It's access to education. It's access to wealth. It's access to housing, and so on and so on. The lack of access, the gap between who has and who hasn't is wide in the United States, wider than in many other countries. So that's point number one, that we're all in the same boat. We're not on the same deck. There's a hole in the bottom of the boat, and we all ought to be concerned about that. Point number two, you've heard this. Any system is designed to produce what it produces. Any system is designed to produce what it produces. This boat was designed, and this boat was designed to be unequal. Couple examples. 1779, Thomas Jefferson, one of the founders of our public education system, proposed a two-track educational system with different tracks, in his words, for the laboring and the learned. Different tracks. Scholarship would allow a very few of the laboring class to advance by, in his words, raking a few geniuses from the rubbish. That is the root of our public education system. A two-track system designed to serve some to the advantage of education and to not serve others, or to rake a few from the rubbish and let them have some scholarship. The system was designed to produce what it produces. So when we ask, why does our education system produce inequities? Because it was designed to do so. Another example, and it's about how our country was founded, the democracy that we have in this country. The founding fathers had a vision of democracy in part, but what we don't get taught much is that our founding fathers never experienced democracy before coming to this country. They were in all kinds of sorts of class oppression, class structures, religious, in other countries where they came from. So they had to find examples of democracy. They had to do some research to say, well, how are we going to create this vision, this democracy that we have in mind? And guess where they found it? Anyone know? We know it as the Iroquois Confederacy, or the Iroquois Confederation. This was a group of clans. It's actually called the Haudenosaunee people. The Western name was Iroquois. That wasn't their native name. But they were a group of people from different clans, from different nations, who formed what we called a confederation, a confederacy. And they formed a government that our founding fathers saw as the model for the United States. And here's what they found, a couple things that they found with this confederation. They found that the confederation actually found and named an elder who became the most powerful person in the confederation, the executive. This was an elder. So they named, our founding fathers found that this federation has an elder who is leading the entire confederation, the entire confederacy of the Illinois. And he was put in that position, but the decisions that he made were subjected to approval by a council. And the council were representatives from the different clans. The clans sent one or two representatives to be on the council, who then approved the elders' decisions. What's that sound like to you? Our executive branch and our legislative branch. They also found that this confederacy had a constitution. A constitution was about serving the people. They also found that they had this federation had 3 branches of government. In the Native American way, they had a civil administration, a military, and a branch that dealt with the sacred. Those were the 3 branches. Our founding fathers translated that into the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the Supreme Court. Right? We got that, we modeled after that. They also found that diplomacy was a core practice with the Native Americans. And only males were representing the people. It was only the men that were representing the people. So our founding fathers modeled after that, but there were a couple of key things that they decided not to take into our way of doing government. The first one is that the Iroquois Confederacy made decisions by consensus, not majority rule, by consensus. Our founding fathers decided, now we don't want to do it that way. The second thing, and maybe the most important, they decided not to do a practice that the Confederacy did, which was this. Men were the only ones who were allowed to be in office. Women were the ones who put them in office. And if the men messed up, the women can take them out. And they did. So I want you to imagine, had we adopted that, what might be different today if all the women in this room were allowed to say to those who are representing the whole community, you're not doing the job, you're out. What might happen? How might things be different? So instead, our founding fathers designed a system to benefit the elite on the backs of everyone else. Isabel Wilkerson named it this way in her book, Caste. And this is about the design of the system. She said, the system is an artificial construction of fixed and embedded ranking of human value that sets the presumed supremacy of one group against the presumed inferiority of other groups on the basis of ancestry and often immutable traits that would be neutral in the abstract. In short, our system was designed from a belief in racial superiority. That's not in the Constitution. Exactly. But it is there in certain other ways. So it was designed also not just with race superiority in mind, but with male superiority in mind. Otherwise, they would have followed the tradition from the Native Americans about women having the right to get men out of office if they were not following the rules of supporting the community. It's not an accident that we have wealth, health, housing, and employment disparities. It's by design. And that's the point of the second one. Tracy Kidder wrote a book called Mountains Beyond Mountains, where he was talking about how we are designed. And he says, accidents happen, but not every bad thing that happens is an accident. Right? So what we have in front of us is something that we created that wasn't an accident. And if we do not engage in redesigning what we have, by default, we are engaging in perpetuating what we have. There's no neutral when it comes to looking at the systems that we're in. All right, so my last point is this, that it's possible to change, to radically transform our society. It is possible for that, but it requires a few things. And I'm just going to highlight 3 things. First, it requires disturbance. Transformation requires disturbance. Change doesn't happen unless there's disturbance. How many of you, and I'm going to look for your hands, how many of you have ever gone through transformation or change at one time in your life? Everyone's holding their hand up, I think, right? Now keep your hand up if you went through this transformation in complete comfort. Not so much, right? Change requires disturbance. If we do not disturb what is happening inside of or outside of us, then change won't happen. So disturbance is our friend if we want transformation. If we want to change what's happening around inequities, then we want to produce disturbance. We want to embrace disturbance. Disturbance happens often, at least for me, when I'm awakened to the realities around me. That's what happened in writing this paper, being awakened. I was talking to Bill earlier about one of my favorite movies that kind of makes this point about being awakened is the movie The Matrix. If any of you remember that movie. And if you haven't, and I recognize there's a whole new generation on the planet now than when that movie came out. Rent it. That's even an old word. Go to Netflix, right? You don't have to rent it. Download it. The Matrix was an example of seeing the world around us was one of high inequities, and in order to change it, you had to wake up and see it. You had to see the system. So when we see the system, disturbance happens. And when disturbance happens, there's a chance for change and transformation to come about. We have seen some real life disturbances often, but particularly in the past couple of years. The murder of George Floyd was a massive disturbance. A massive disturbance, right? It had a character to it that disturbed us in a way that the other murders had not disturbed us. Something different happened. We got disturbed as a collective. We watched 8.5 minutes, even more so the trial shows, of a man dying, right? We all saw that. It disturbed us to our core. That disturbance is what allows for movement and allows for us to change. If we see it, and if we allow it to stay with us. So transformation requires disturbance. It also requires social solidarity. That's point 2 on how change happens. Social solidarity has to happen if we're going to actually have change. Change from individuals to changes in structure to changes in the system come about because people get together. I'm imagining, this is where I go to my what if article, I'm imagining women 100 years plus ago gathering in solidarity, saying something like, we're tired of this, you can't vote business. And I'm imagining if they were asking themselves what if questions. And I wonder, what do you think some of the what if questions would have been from women 100 years ago when they were trying to get the right to vote? What might the women have been saying? What would you as women in this room be saying? If you were there 100 years ago, you didn't have the right to vote. You were disturbed by seeing that this was happening. You didn't want to have it anymore. You might get kind of creative. Well, what if, fill in the blank, what might you say? What if we make them all sleep on the couch? What if, right? Now, what I'm trying to bring up here is that the solidarity that comes to make change happen. So we want to remember that solidarity is what it's gonna take. What if we had solidarity that went back to put in place the areas of our democracy that the Iroquois offered us that we left out? What if we created solidarity to make that happen, to right the wrongs that were left out? My final point about transformation is that it requires a kind of leadership that we call rebel leadership. and it's leadership about never giving up. I have met several people as I've come into town today, including Bill being one of them. And what I see in talking with some of you already is that there's a kind of leadership here in this auditorium, but in this community. There's a kind of leadership that is the kind of leadership that's required to produce the transformation that we're after. And it's going to take a leader and leaders who are persistent, who never give up, who take action when they see inequities happen, and who are not bystanders. The Duomo in Italy is a big dome. Anybody know about the Duomo in Italy? A few of you do. It took 200 plus years to build the Duomo. The architect who started it knowing he would not be alive to see it finished, but he started it anyway. He also started it without knowing how it could be finished. He knew that he could build the foundation and build the bricks on up, but he had no idea when it got to the dome part how it was going to be held up. But he decided he was going to do it anyway because he believed that somebody was going to come along, generations from him, and figure out how to do it. So he persisted. So we're like building the Duomo when it comes to working towards racial equity right now, where it's going to take persistence for us to keep working to build a structure, to build a system that hasn't yet been figured out. We haven't figured out how to solve this problem, otherwise we would have. So I'm going to close by saying a couple things here, and then we'll get to some conversation. That we didn't create the systems of inequity, we inherited the systems. Again, Wilkerson in Caste uses a metaphor of what we've inherited, and she uses the metaphor of a house and asks us to think about a house, an old home that we've inherited. It's like we're current occupants of a property with stress cracks, bowed walls, fissures built into the foundation. This house is messed up in many ways. It has a lot of problems. But then she says, you're in the house, it's yours. Any further deterioration is in fact in our hands now. So we've inherited these systems of inequities, and it's now in our hands, whether you created it or not, whether you were part of it or not. It's in your hands. It's in my hands. So if you want to wake up, if you want to see what's going on around you, if you want to develop your mindset of shared fate, of linking arms, taking leadership to do something, I want to hear from you. I want to join you. And I want you to find others in your community and get into coalition with them to join together in solidarity, human to human. Imagine, redesign, and dismantle. And always ask, what if? What if we did this? What if we did that? Heather McGee sums it up this way in her book, The Sum of Us. She said, solidarity is the answer, that the sum, S-U-M, solidarity is the answer that the sum of us can accomplish far more than just some of us. I will leave you there. Thank you so much. Bill, come on up. Let's get started.
How's my microphone?
I think you'll turn it on. It's not on yet.
Okay. I hope I didn't mess up my microphone when I took my mask off. It seems okay.
Yep, you're okay.
Hugh, that was awesome. Thank you. Awesome and inspiring and daunting, and I find myself thinking about the school year that's about to start. A school year that comes on the, I wanted to say on the heels of a big disturbance, but we don't know that it's on the heels yet. How should teacher leaders and building leaders and district leaders and parent and community leaders be thinking about using the moment that we've been in, the disturbed moment, as school starts? How do we not let inertia prevent us from using that moment?
Well, we didn't talk about this, but I haven't reread the article I wrote for about 9 months. And I feel as though I want to ask all the educators, parents, people in this room, the what if question, in answer to that question. I know I'm working with school systems, and they're doing their hardest, they're trying hard to go back to normal. And normal to them means like it was before the pandemic, even though they embraced during the pandemic doing it very differently. So right after the pandemic, some of the systems I was working with, every student had an automatic A. There were no grades. They couldn't do it. They were on Zoom, right? Everyone had an automatic A. Everyone, they eliminated, they couldn't do the SAT at that time. So how did people get into college? Well, there was some way that was found out, right? They were paying attention to social emotional learning as a connection to academic learning. Like, you won't learn math if you are not socially emotionally able to sit in the chair. They focused on learning instead of on butts and seats, right? So I'm asking myself, what if we were doing some of those things that I raised in the article tomorrow when school starts, or next week from school starts, and to what extent are educators going back to trying to be the normal that it was before?
It seems like there's this hierarchy of systemic pressures on teachers that come from places above, and Utah is a very decentralized power structure in terms of schools. There are school boards, 41 different school boards, and the State Board of Education. But what if a school board said, what if a school board said, we want to continue personalized student learning, focused on connecting with students and social and emotional. Like, is it necessary to get someone in power to say what if in order to see a cascade of behavior change? Or like, how does power work in a system of disturbance?
Wow, yeah. I know many teachers that say, yeah, okay, you told me what I had to do, and guess what? It's like, yeah, I think I know better what I should be doing. So I think the power part to it is, and I've worked with superintendents and principals, I think the power part of it is for those in power to give cover for the what if to happen. What if that happened?
Yeah.
What if those in power were actually giving cover to teachers and others who actually want to, and I'll be a little provocative, maybe radical or whatever. What if a teacher wanted to spend the first 2 weeks of school only on social emotional learning? What if a teacher spent the first 2 weeks producing a climate of belonging in the classroom where every student knew that they belonged in there, right? What if that social emotional learning in the first 2 weeks took care of that cortisol that runs in the brain that stops kids from learning because something happened on their way to school or even in school, right? What if they took the time to calm, to meditate, to connect, to build relationship? What if that's what we did in the first 2 weeks, right? What might that produce in terms of the advancement of academics?
I'm not an education expert, but
Right.
I believe that would produce better academic outcomes, right? Yeah, yeah.
It just might,
Yeah.
right? What stops us, Bill, do you think, then, from actually going to those kinds of innovations? I'm not saying I have the answers either, but what stops the spirit of innovation from happening, do you think?
There might be, or likely are, many things. It seems like there isn't enough space created for that innovation to me. It seems like there are a lot of rules to comply with. And those rules are coming at people from everywhere. And expectations are coming at people from everywhere. And it doesn't seem like there's enough. Like if our legislature, for example, said, what if? Like, we're going to take some testing pressure off. We're going to allow, encourage, and support that kind of connection to students and energy that we believe will come back in terms of academic progress. But so it seems like somebody's got to start peeling away the rules, the compliance, the expectation, and maybe also I'd say one other thing, and then in the form of a question. It seems like there's something we don't talk enough about, which is the expectations of parents for whom the system works just fine right now. Like, there are lots of folks for whom the system is doing okay. And disturbing that creates a buzzsaw of opposition, I think. Do you see that in your work around the country?
Yeah, and the question is, what's the goal? What are those parents after, right? Because what they're actually doing is hurting all kids, including their own, when they limit what goes on for all kids, right?
So in that case, there's not a widespread recognition that we're all in the same boat.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. Where have you seen places where that recognition for those that keep the system working for that portion of the population have recognized that we're all in the same boat and have embraced change?
Well, there's lots of places, actually. There's classrooms and whole schools I've seen where they are paying attention to the experience of every student, for example, right? So when you look at some of the places I'm working where they're the Black students, African American students, the Latino, Latinx students are actually doing the poorest academically of everybody. And the curriculum and the teaching is actually producing advancement for the white kids, right? We see that in lots of different places, right? I've seen schools that are looking at producing curriculum and producing, again, social emotional learning that has every culture identified in the curriculum, right? So just start there. If you can see yourself in the curriculum, then you see yourself as a scholar, then you see yourself as deserving, then you see yourself as belonging, right? So I've seen teachers and I've seen principals and I've seen school systems that are redesigning, they're innovating in how they are actually getting students to actually embrace being students in the classroom based on their cultural background. And that's a win for everybody, right? But the parents you're talking about who don't see that as a win for everybody are the ones who are dismantling what we now know across the country as the critical race theory, or they're dismantling, they have these checklists of words that you cannot use in the classroom anymore, or they are producing policy that fines a teacher for teaching history in a different way than what's in the traditional textbook, right? So there's something happening with those parents where, and I say parents, but it's actually more than that, that are trying to, I think they're scared. I think they're scared of loss. and do not see the gain that comes from being in community with multiple cultures.
Yeah. It seems like maybe disturbance often creates a backlash, and it seems like maybe one response to that backlash is just to choose up sides as if we're not on the same boat,
Right.
and do battle. It seems like another response is to try to build that awareness, to decrease the fear, to find connection.
That, to me, that is one of the biggest challenges we have right now, is figuring out how do we produce a mindset and a heart set of linked fate and of shared fate. How can we produce, however it comes out, how do we produce the opportunity and the ability for us to link the hearts of all the people that we're talking about?
Yeah.
We don't know how to do that. We have not been successful doing that. I think what happened in our country January 6th and around all that, that showed the vast division that we have, is evidence that we have not figured out how to actually produce linked fate and shared fate amongst our collective.
Yeah. It seems maybe ironic that the public education system that was designed with some inherent inequities seems also to have been a place, or it seems to have been a system in some places where linked fate actually gets created by having kids of different, social strata and race in the same class, or in the same school, having the same experiences, but other forms of systemic racism, redlining, and economic discrimination have always and still made that difficult or rare. Right?
Yeah.
Do you have to tackle structural racism in schools and in our economy and in our healthcare system all at the same time? Because that seems like a big job.
Yeah, that's a big job, Bill. I think we don't know the answer to that exactly. I mean, some say that you do have to tackle all that at the same time. I think that if we got started in some places and built momentum, and it could be in education, that it would ripple to other places and other systems. I was part of a group in Grand Rapids, Michigan, a community group that was business leaders and social leaders and church leaders and education leaders and medical health leaders. I mean, just people from all over the community. They came into, this is where McGee talks about the social solidarity part. They were working on each parts of those. Someone was working on transportation, someone was working on housing, someone was working on the banks and redlining, someone was working on education. They came together. They were doing their own thing in a way, but they came together in coalition to say, we have to be in solidarity with what we're doing in order for this group to make a bigger difference than any one of us could. So there's a mindset about that. I would say that we do need to be doing systems change in all of those systems, but it is daunting. And I think we can get into coalition around the things that we care most about, and that could be, I focus on education, you focus on economic development, and we'll make progress.
Yeah. I've heard you say in a dialogue online, I heard you talk about a mindset shift from looking backwards to fix this broken system to looking forward to redesign something better.
Yeah.
Let's talk more about why that mindset shift is helpful or important.
Yeah, because it moves us into designers. If we have the mindset and we shift our mindset, it's like being in the portal. We're looking at the future. We're looking at what could be. If we have the mindset of that, then we can imagine it differently. And if we can't imagine it differently, we won't produce it differently. So that mindset, the shift in mindset, is absolutely key. If we have a mindset of innovation, a mindset of design, a mindset of going into the unknown. I was talking with one superintendent that I work with. I've been working with her for 4 years and had a session with her on Tuesday. And she said, we have finally shifted our mindset to embrace uncertainty in where we're going.
In a whole school district. That's big.
And I said, my work is done. No, I didn't say that, but I was so pleased that mindset of looking ahead at what could be different and imagining produced feelings of uncertainty, but that uncertainty was braced. They're going to be able to do something innovative and design differently now than they were last year when they didn't have that mindset.
Yeah. I'm not sure I want to go down this road, but now I have. And so it seems like one place where that designing mindset occurs is in charter schools, where people have just said, well, I'm going to do a charter school, and we're going to design differently because we aren't able to do X, Y, and Z in the system. And I personally have always been, I appreciate that innovation, but I'm deeply dissatisfied with the kids it leaves behind. So I don't spend much time thinking about charter school as a strategy. I want to think about how do you get to what you just described, to whole big, school districts with that mindset. How did that superintendent get to that place? And maybe it wasn't the superintendent. I know superintendents who are there, some in this room. How did they get everyone else in their system? The folks that have been around for a long time, believing they can't change anything, thinking things are fine. How did that superintendent get there with their team, with their people?
Well, they're not all the way there yet, right? First of all, what she does have is a critical mass of people who are in that mindset, from the district leadership to school leadership to some teachers and to some students, right? So there's been a whole system that has been slowly getting into that mindset. And now there are enough people from all those categories that are in the mindset. And now they have a chance to actually make some really significant innovation that will, in theory, it will bring the rest of the people along.
You bring up the role of students in this change process. And that seems that idea seems abnormal, right? We don't embrace students as change agents and young voices and community voices and parent voices. What's the key recognition that has to happen within the education system to recognize that parents and students' voices need to be part of the design process?
Well, we have to believe that's important. First of all, it has to be a value. I can tell you, in the past couple of years, we have been working with systems that have brought students into this discussion. So one example is this. System has very low proficiency rates in literacy and math. African American students and Latino students are 20%, 25% proficiency, right? The adults in the system, some of the adults, especially the leaders in the system, have been highly disturbed by that. So they have brought in program after program after program to do something about that. It hasn't moved the needle at all. in working with them, we started asking, what would the students say about that problem of those students, of themselves, not moving past 20-25% proficiency, right? And the answer was, we don't know, because we've never asked them. So then we said, why don't you go ask them? Let's do a design move here. A design move means you test something. Go ask them. Test out the question and see what happens. And let's learn from the design move that you're making. So they did that. They went and they tested, and they tested out the asking the question, why is it you think that our proficiency rates are so low? They got some of the most amazing answers that none of the adults ever thought of.
Yeah, I'll bet some of those answers created disturbance.
They did create disturbance. Yeah. And some of those answers were things like, I don't read anything about where I come from. Why would I? Right? Mm-hmm. In other words, they didn't see themselves in the curriculum. Yeah. Right? Things like that. Yeah. So anyway, there are innovations that we can do. We have to get in the mindset of being designers and testing those innovations.
So
we ready to get some?
I think, let's see if there are questions from the audience.
Or what I would also ask, I don't know how we would do this if we could actually hear from people, but not just questions, but now I'm looking at all of you out here. For me, it'd be wonderful to hear your thoughts, your insights, what this raises for you, or questions. But it's like, wow, how is what we're talking about sitting with you? What meaning are you making of it? What's it bringing up?
Do we probably don't need it because this is a well-designed auditorium, but do we have microphones in the audience? Doesn't matter. Yeah, you could project. Should someone take you up on his invitation, you could certainly use your teacher voice or your
parent voice.
Parent voice, yeah.
Go ahead and we can't really see you too well, but stand up if you would, please, and just loud as you can.
Thank you so much for being here. Earlier you talked a little bit about how the systems are designed to produce what they produce. And I had some mixed thoughts about it, and I want to ask you some clarifying questions if that's okay. I feel like we live in a culture today where a lot of people feel like that there are systems designed to produce what they produce and they're out to get me. And so what I tell a lot of people on our team at our organization is, sometimes we try to combat homophobia, but not everyone is out to get you because you're Muslim. Some people just don't know. So a lot of that comes from the system producing people who now don't know why they discriminate, right? So it's not personal, but at the same time I'm torn because I recognize the things you're talking about that they are system produced. But I'm nervous that if we react to what you're talking about, we're going to create this inevitable me versus you, us versus them, zero-sum game almost that creates the divisiveness that we see even in politics all the way to the social discourse today. So the strategy in my mind is it's too distracting to go down that path, and so we should move away from the system produced this to how can I connect to the individual. What I'm hearing from you is maybe I'm enabling the system by doing that, so I don't know what's right.
Got it. Well, test it. Try it out. I think it's a fair question, and it's a great question. There's some work, some thinking going on to that very point that goes to if we talk about whatever it is, the system is designed to produce what it's going to alienate, it's going to create an us versus them, it's going to have people being defensive, it's going to target, right? It's just going to have the opposite result. We say it and we want people to understand it and embrace it because if they don't see the system, then the system will stay invisible. And if the system stays invisible, nothing's going to change, right? And this is why I say it's a design question, it's something to test, Because if we do say it and it produces an us versus them, then we're not doing ourselves any good either, right? That is a new challenge that will come. One of the things that seems to be happening is that the more progress we make on equity, the more narrative of us versus them comes from others, right? So you might see it as a sign of progress, that if we get pushback like we're getting right now, the pushback, the backlash, and all of that, that is a sign that we're making progress, right? So it's not something to stop doing what we're doing, it's to get smarter about how we can impact not just those that are with us, but those who are not, right? Because we want to ultimately do that. I don't know the answer to, what are the right things to say or do, but opening up the conversation and inviting people to make meaning of when I say the system is designed to produce what it produces, what does that raise in you? What does that bring up in you? What does it make you think about? Do you know any systems that are designed to produce that, right? Have them come up with examples. What about our healthcare system? What is it designed to produce? You see where I'm going with it? So it's making attempts to try things that might stick. Thank you for that.
We've got a fair number of questions coming in electronically, so I'll go back and forth and start with one here. How do you build the social solidarity team to be most effective? Who should you think about being on the team? And how do you surface their shared motivation, even if it's not 100% aligned on all the details?
Well, how much time do we have? All
night. We've got all night.
That would be a great course at this community college, by the way. That'd be a great course. Well, let's look at the who. Social solidarity means that you come from different backgrounds, right? That's by definition, that you're building solidarity with people who are like you and people who are, quote, not like you. Right, so the best teams are those who come from a variety of backgrounds, and that could be ethnic, racial, gender, sexual orientation, social class. It could be from a lot of different ways that we are different from each other. So first of all, the who is as wide and diverse as possible. How do you do it? Is the best way that I've seen anybody do it is to actually get into coalition, meaning you're meeting and you start studying something. So the paper I wrote would be something to start making meaning of. Mm-hmm. The books that are out right now that you could get in a collective and start making meaning of the books. You have your own experiences to bring in, right? Yep. So what are each of our experiences? We were talking about our experiences in the green room, right? When we were talking to each other about, well, what was the catalyst, Bill, that got you going in this mindset of equity? You know, I wouldn't know if I walked by you on the street in Salt Lake City, I wouldn't say, oh, there's an equity champion. Not necessarily, but I know better now, don't I?
You're not the only one who...
I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
So I'm saying that we have to be, part of the how is to get into community with each other in ways that our indigenous siblings, brothers and sisters know how to do that. So we can learn from others about how do we actually get connected to each other, get in relationship with each other, and do it in a way that has us staying in the room. The persistence I talked about earlier is like you can't give up when things get hard, right? Or if it's not working. So, okay, we meet today and I go back to California and I say, wow, I can't wait to get back to Utah to go have lunch with Bill, right? And I could also say, yeah, we got a lot to talk about, Bill, right? We got some things that we gotta learn about each other in order for us to be in coalition. So it takes persistence doing that.
Yeah, when it's hard, persistence when.
And what's your thought about that question?
I agree and believe and value very much the idea that social solidarity across class and race and all types is super, super important. And I'm proud of the team and the organizational effort we've made around that through our partnership here and through United Way, because I see, I see real commitment and practice to being in solidarity, to listening to each other, to having difficult conversations and staying in them, and
Right.
and it's hard, but I see that, and I think it matters a lot.
Yep.
I think I saw another hand in the audience. I hate to point at people, but you've got your hand kind of raised. You have a blue mask on. Please.
Oh, there's a microphone there. Great.
Oh boy. I hate to backtrack from where the online question took y'all on stage, but I was thinking about the question from the audience a minute ago, and my head was merging several of the metaphors that Hugh used. Before you asked your question, we were talking about the house that is faltering, and how one either might mend it or redesign it entirely, and you had talked a lot about access. And so I was imagining redesigning a house that was completely different, that was all glass or had no walls at all, etc., and that everyone could be in. Or just keeping the house that we have, but letting everyone in and making sure that the people inside the house were welcoming and that they shared their space. And I think that you don't have to worry about whether the work that it sounds like you're attempting to do might be enabling the system currently, because there are more than one ways to fix. And whatever we have, the hole in the boat, the other metaphor, and that we could actually share the spaces that we do have and redesign. We could build a new Duomo, but we could let people in before they're done, right? Before the new project is done. And so I think there's like multiple ways to be addressing the issues, and you're doing part of that, and we're brainstorming other ways to do part of that too.
Great ideas. Yeah.
Okay, let's go here, and then we'll come back to the emailed questions.
And again, questions, insights, responses, like you just did, that's perfect.
So I'm a teacher in the classroom, and teachers have a lot more power than they realize. I can help make or break an intervention by the position of my door. So understanding the positional power of teachers with respect to helping students learn or barring them from that learning, how can we leverage the power of teachers to help disrupt current systems and reimagine new systems that can sometimes reach so deep that they reach into state and federal law?
You know, what it made me think about was the women of the Confederacy being having the power to tell the men to get out if they're not doing it right. What if the teachers were like that? You as a teacher you're on the ground having the most impact of anybody with those students, right? If you have knowledge and insight about what's working and how to build a learning environment and how to teach, who needs to be hearing that, right? So you have the power and authority in your classroom, right, to do that with the students. It seems like what we're missing in the design of the system is the communication that goes from the classroom to the boardroom, right, and then to the legislature. Would you have ideas, and I'm really asking you, would you have ideas of what the legislature ought to be doing now, what they ought to be passing now, what they ought to be legislating now, that would make a difference to you as a teacher?
I have a lot of ideas.
You have a lot of ideas.
I think that
going back to what you were saying, we are in a huge position of opportunity to reimagine how we think of holding students accountable, how we think of holding teachers accountable.
We are in a position where we have been disrupted already, and we are now, I think, in a dangerous position of re-cementing ourselves into the status quo as we move out of the pandemic, hopefully, and back into a more normal existence. And I hate to see that opportunity slip by, where we can reimagine what does a test look like. For example, last year, my students had to take the RISE test, my math students had to take the RISE test a full quarter before they had learned the information they were being, like they missed 25% of what they had to know to be successful on that test. But for them, it comes back to them and they think it's their fault. And so it feeds the feedback loop of I'm not good enough, I can't do this, when really it's the system in place that is positioning them to fail. And so, that's one thing we could look at is reimagine the way we think of showing the learning of students. Yes. That's one thing I would definitely want to talk with legislatures about.
Let me ask you something real quick. Thank you, sorry. You're doing a great job. How would you answer this question? How are students learning in your classroom?
How do I answer that question?
Yeah. Are students learning?
Are students learning in my classroom?
Not how did they do on the test.
My students learn every single moment.
And how do you know?
Because they are responding and they are acting and they are engaging in ways. And when I say they learn from every single moment, if I lose my cool, if I yell at them, if I talk down to them, they're learning. If I am calm, you talked about social emotional learning the first 2 weeks of the year. Social emotional learning happens every moment in the classroom, and we are either building it or breaking it down by the way we engage with our students. And so, how do I know they're learning? They want to come to my class. Mm-hmm. How do I know they're learning? They try. How are they learning? They fall down and they pick themselves back up. There are a lot of ways to show that they are learning. We don't have to have a standardized test that shows that they are learning. It is a quantitative approach that does not capture what students really know. There are other ways we could capture those. But it means we have to reimagine how we define learning and how we measure it.
I think you just wrote the legislation. Yeah, right. So that's why I asked you the question, is that the focus has not been on learning, it's been on how they do on the test. Not your focus, but the system's focus. In the pandemic and in the opportunity, you could no longer, the test didn't mean, I would argue it didn't mean a whole lot anyway, because they're not predictive. The SAT is not predictive of college success, right? Nor honors courses or AP courses. They don't predict success. They don't predict learning, right? But you're talking about what learning looks like. And that's where we have the opportunity to go to asking ourselves, are we focusing on learning? And how do we know? And you answered it beautifully. You do know. So if we let you alone? Yeah, so this is not to bash tests, let me say that. I'm sure you give a few tests in your classroom, right? But if your focus is on learning, then we get to innovate about how do we know students are learning. And if they're not learning, we get to figure out how to help them learn. So I appreciate that's a great point you made.
Sure, go ahead.
Just as our friend over here was talking about, she has the support of an administrator. We work in family engagement in about 30 different schools, and it is instant when you walk into a school. You feel if the principal is on board or not. You feel if the parents are valued. Parents feel this, teachers feel this. So when we're talking about this emotional, social well-being, I do believe it comes straight from the leadership, because it's a physical feeling that you get as soon as you walk in the doors. And especially with that front office staff, they are the most important people as well in the school. And if their administrator is not treating families with love and respect, the office staff is not as well. And so we work with amazing principals who are doing a great job at this, but we also have principals who don't prioritize that. So do you have any advice for how we can talk to parents when they're feeling undervalued or disrespected?
To the parents?
Yeah.
When parents are feeling disrespected and undervalued?
Yes. When they don't want to walk into an office or into a school, when there's that fear because of the unwelcoming, the feeling that they don't belong, whether it's language, ethnicity, etc.
Yep. And this is, to me, this is a question for anybody in the room, right? Do you feel comfortable walking into those offices, into those schools, right? So there's a measure right there. It's like, well, if you don't feel comfortable walking in, if you know, on your way in you start to shake, you know, or you're wondering how you're going to be treated, or you actually know how you're going to be treated and you don't want to be treated that. I mean, that's an indicator if staff don't feel, if staff feel that way as well. I guess what I would say is, again, some of the systems that I've worked with and recently some of the schools I've worked with, they've just now, I don't want to say this degrading in any way, and this was just this week. The principal said to me, "We've never asked the parents how are they doing with what we're doing. This year, it is now part of our curriculum to ask the parents, how is it going, right?" So how long have these schools been in operation? Since the 1800s, something like that, right? And thankfully, they're at this place of saying, oh, we need to ask parents what's going on, right? So there's something about how are we disconnected from parents, as if that were, I think it's part of the design of school to not be connected to parents, first of all. I remember when my son was in 4th grade, the school and the teachers said, you can no longer come and talk to us about your students, except for whatever the parent conferences were, because we are now going to prepare them for middle school or whatever, right? So now we disconnect, whereas before, how many of you will volunteer in the classroom and read to your student in 3rd grade and 2nd grade and 1st grade and kindergarten, right? It's like we need all the parent volunteers we can get, but all of a sudden the parents are excused, you know, at a certain point in time, like in 4th grade. So we have as part of our design of the system is really to not include parents. I think there's something that has to happen on a systemic level, that you're raising what we talk about as see the system, right? So what happens when you see the system? You have to wake people up to seeing the system in the same way that you've seen it. And then people have to be activated back to that solidarity to actually say, do you see it? So do we all collectively see it? And you move into social solidarity about what do we all see happening with parents in our school, right? And then it becomes something that not just one person sees, it becomes something that many are making meaning of, and that will activate doing something about it. But you've got to be bringing the visibility to it, right? So I think that's just one of my answers. There may be others, though. I don't know what our time was like, but it's a great question.
It is 8:30. This has been awesome. Thank you. I want to thank everybody who came tonight. I want to thank everybody who joined us online. I want to thank our sponsors who helped facilitate this. financially. And I especially want to thank you, Hugh. In addition to just sharing your experience and your wisdom, you've inspired us with some pretty powerful ideas that are hopeful in their simplicity. The idea that we're all on the same boat, and the simple question of what if, and empowering that question over and over and over again with equity in mind it's super, super powerful. So thank you for that. And I don't know if you actually tried to do this, but your implied what if we did this differently and had a conversation was awesome. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Well, thank you all.
Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you all. It feels like we just got started, and appreciate all of your thoughts, comments, questions, and great to be with you. And Bill, it was terrific. Thank you so much.